Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to honor a remarkable individual.
Room shifted. One of them stopped in front of me. He didn't salute. He just said, "Sir, we need to talk now." In that moment, I felt the weight of something familiar, the cold pull of classified orders. This wasn't about honor. It was about something I'd left behind. I'd come to be celebrated, but what they came to tell me would expose a truth buried deep in the shadows of my own service. And for the first time in my career, I didn't know if I was ready to hear it. Thanks for your time you always spent to watch our videos. We appreciate you a lot. Please remember to share this video with your loved ones. Wherever you are watching from, show US love and click subscribe. Let's dive into the story of Commander Ethan's ring when they stood up and left. The hollowed-out ache of being abandoned in front of strangers, rather than the shallow shock of an explosion or the ringing of a battlefield. People kept clapping. The captain, bless him, kept his face steady as the band played. My feet were not the same as mine. Later, someone would call it humiliation. At the time, I didn't have the name for it. I had my promotion. I had a body full of medals. I also had a taste of metal in my mouth, like a coin pressed against my tongue, and the quiet seat where my family should have been. I am not an extravagant man. I never was. The service taught me to measure my life in simple things. The way my boots fit, whether a teammate had shown up for the morning run, and the sharp click of a properly threaded bolt. Before the ceremony, I thought that having one day where I would be recognized would be enough to stitch the years together, to prove to them and to myself that everything I had given had not been given in vain. It appeared as though the thread had been pulled as they left. The first nights afterward were small, suffocating theaters of replay. I would lie awake, watching the ceiling seam with the same level of attention I used to give a mission brief. Why had they left? Had I done something wrong? Had I been absent one too many times? Are they resentful of my uniform? As if it had been stolen? I thought of little things, the missed school games, the birthday calls that lasted only a minute, the time I had to cancel dinner because I was routed to the field. Anger was honest and immediate. I wanted to call every person I loved and tell them to see me now. Shame was more subdued and destructive. I could picture my neighbors across the street, the kids I'd coached, the old men at the VFW. Their glances had changed during the ceremony, or maybe I was making that up. I was not supposed to care about applause. I was supposed to be above it. But the human heart is a small, needy animal, and applause is how it eats. I started to look for answers like a man hunts for a missing ledger. I asked a friend from the unit if he had heard anything. He shrugged. "People are complicated," he said. He had seen men break over worse things: betrayal, loss of honor, deceit. But when I pushed, when I said, "Did they say something? Has anybody called?" there was silence. Eventually, he admitted that my mother had taken a call during the ceremony and left. That small detail became a door I forced open. When you've carried a weight your whole adult life, you develop a taste for detail. I asked the base attendant if anyone had called. Nothing. I asked the ceremony coordinator. Nothing. I asked my sister's friend because she had a flock of them who posted everything. That wasn't fruitful either. One night, more from desperation than strategy, I drove to my parents' house. The porch light was off. The house sat the way it always had, practical and stubborn. The front door answered my knock with a silence that felt like a verdict. My father opened the door a crack, the way a man opens something pent up and not yet decided. "Son," he said. His voice was a map of old roads. "Why did you leave?" I asked. The question had the brittle quality of something overused, but it was all I had. He didn't answer at once. As if to prevent the night from rushing in, he let the door close partially. Toward the end, he said, "It wasn't about you. It wasn't safe." I heard all the versions of that phrase in my head. Not safe, meaning 100 things that did not include me. I tried to thread the possibilities until something held. Maybe they had been threatened. Maybe a debt. Maybe there were other people in our lives who had reasons to keep them away from me. Theories collided in me like small, angry birds. "Who?" I asked. He gave a head shake. I shouldn't say it here. That should have been the end of my hope. Instead, it turned into firewood. I began to piece the pieces together in the same way that a locked box is taken apart. There were small things I'd ignored. A package left at their door with no signature, a car parked across the street that left when I looked at it, and my sister's vague excuses about work. There was also an undercurrent I had never known how to name, a worry in their voices I had always mistaken for pride. Pride does not call at midnight. In quieter areas, I began asking around. Men who had been in my life before the sharp edges of rank and protocol, retired officers, old friends who owed me and whom I owed. One of them, a man named Conrad, who had slept 5 miles from me in 3 different theaters, told me something that made the world tilt. "You didn't notice?" he asked, and when I said no, his face folded. They were followed. For months. It's not overt. 2 cars in different patterns. A man who asks about you at the diner then disappears. Your sister no longer went out at night. We sat across from each other in a booth the color of tired vinyl, and Conrad told me what he knew. He spoke sparingly and with the bluntness of a man accustomed to speaking only what was necessary. "There's a network," he told me. "Contractors, ex-military types, people who buy information. They work the edges. If you were under their scope, they could have done what they did." When he used the word contractors, I felt like a bell had been slapped against my ribs. Contractors meant a different world, the kind that dealt with logistics, surveillance, and black budgets. They chased profit and were clumsy about moral consequences. He told me that sometimes, when a soldier's family is targeted, it's an intimidation tactic. Make the home life painful, make the soldier second guess. Build leverage. Make him grind. The first time the thought came that perhaps they had left to protect me, I felt relieved like a man in a flooded cellar who discovers a dry corner. But relief was hollow and quickly invaded by another feeling: betrayal. Had my family made a secret choice to exile me on a day meant to honor me, without telling me why? Had they used me as cover for their fear? I went back to the house. There, tucked into an envelope under the 3rd stair, was a note in my mother's handwriting. "We love you. We did what we had to. Please trust us. M." The note was both a bomb and an accusation. It contained no answers, only the ache of decisions made in the dark. That night, I slept in my car because I wasn't sure if I could handle being in a house that kept things from me. A week later, things became impossible to ignore. My sister called me at dawn, her voice a wind through paper. "They were here," she said. "That's all." Then the line went dead. I went there by car. The neighborhood, which had been a quiet string of bungalows and flags, was quieter. There were no footprints in the yard. The curtains in their living room were closed in a way that felt like a fort. By midday, my phone buzzed with a single message that changed everything. "Meet us at the old pier at dusk." See, I did not hesitate. The pier had been where we celebrated small things when we were young: a stolen pack of cigarettes, the first paycheck, a failed marriage. In the dying light, 3 figures were there: my mother, my sister, and my father. They had the look of people who had already been declared absent at their own funerals. There was effort in their smiles, as if they were manufactured to keep me from breaking like glass. Unmarked, low and black, a van pulled up to the pier before I could say anything. 3 men emerged from it, walking in the manner of trained men who move without being observed. They were not in uniform. Their clothes were too plain, and their faces were not the kind of friendly faces you see at base functions. One of them came to a stop and called me by a name I hadn't heard in a long time, my previous call sign, which was the name used prior to promotions and ceremony programs. "You don't remember us?" he asked. I did. A flash of memory. A rooftop in a foreign city. Wind that smelled like diesel and gunmetal. A man on my left that I had kept alive with a tourniquet and a promise. He had been younger then, but was suddenly older now, with the smile of a man who had seen too much, but held a steadiness meant to anchor others. "We're here because of you," he said simply. The word "because" was a pivot. I had expected an apology, an explanation, and a confession. This was not any of those. The men with him introduced themselves as former SEALs, now working a shadowed kind of duty, the kind of task that exists between public orders and private morality, where old odes tether men to acts others would find strange. They had been following the network Conrad had mentioned, but on a different axis. Where Conrad saw contractors, they had seen an operation that ran people for leverage, a ring that hunted for easy targets, soldiers with teeth in the wrong places. They had tracked the ring for a long time, winter to summer, and the ring had a habit of making families vanish in ways that were never publicized. When he used the word contractors, I felt like a bell had been slapped against my ribs. Contractors meant a different world, the kind that dealt with logistics, surveillance, and black budgets. They chased profit and were clumsy about moral consequences. He told me that sometimes, when a soldier's family is targeted, it's an intimidation tactic. Make the home life painful, make the soldier second guess. Build leverage. Make him grind. The first time the thought came that perhaps they had left to protect me, I felt relieved like a man in a flooded cellar who discovers a dry corner. But relief was hollow and quickly invaded by another feeling: betrayal. Had my family made a secret choice to exile me on a day meant to honor me, without telling me why? Had they used me as cover for their fear? I went back to the house. There, tucked into an envelope under the third stair, was a note in my mother's handwriting. "We love you. We did what we had to. Please trust us. M." The note was both a bomb and an accusation. It contained no answers, only the ache of decisions made in the dark. That night, I slept in my car because I wasn't sure if I could handle being in a house that kept things from me. A week later, things became impossible to ignore. My sister called me at dawn, her voice a wind through paper. "They were here," she said. "That's all." Then the line went dead. I went there by car. The neighborhood, which had been a quiet string of bungalows and flags, was quieter. There were no footprints in the yard. The curtains in their living room were closed in a way that felt like a fort. By midday, my phone buzzed with a single message that changed everything. "Meet us at the old pier at dusk." See, I did not hesitate. The pier had been where we celebrated small things when we were young: a stolen pack of cigarettes, the first paycheck, a failed marriage. In the dying light, 3 figures were there: my mother, my sister, and my father. They had the look of people who had already been declared absent at their own funerals. There was effort in their smiles, as if they were manufactured to keep me from breaking like glass. Unmarked, low and black, a van pulled up to the pier before I could say anything. 3 men emerged from it, walking in the manner of trained men who move without being observed. They were not in uniform. Their clothes were too plain, and their faces were not the kind of friendly faces you see at base functions. One of them came to a stop and called me by a name I hadn't heard in a long time, my previous call sign, which was the name used prior to promotions and ceremony programs. "You don't remember us?" he asked. I did. A flash of memory. A rooftop in a foreign city. Wind that smelled like diesel and gunmetal. A man on my left that I had kept alive with a tourniquet and a promise. He had been younger then, but was suddenly older now, with the smile of a man who had seen too much, but held a steadiness meant to anchor others. "We're here because of you," he said simply. The word "because" was a pivot. I had expected an apology, an explanation, and a confession. This was not any of those. The men with him introduced themselves as former SEALs, now working a shadowed kind of duty, the kind of task that exists between public orders and private morality, where old odes tether men to acts others would find strange. They had been following the network Conrad had mentioned, but on a different axis. Where Conrad saw contractors, they had seen an operation that ran people for leverage, a ring that hunted for easy targets, soldiers with teeth in the wrong places. They had tracked the ring for a long time, winter to summer, and the ring had a habit of making families vanish in ways that were never publicized. "You left," my father said quietly, as if breathing out something that had been held in for too long. One of the SEALs, the one whose life I had once helped save, stepped forward and held out a small box. He opened it and revealed an old coin. Palms had polished it after being worn. "We keep these," he said, for men who have done something others would not understand. Today we wanted to give you one to say thank you. But more than that, he paused and studied my face. We wanted you to know why your family did what they did. A story, he told me, was woven together from surveillance logs and whispered confessions, tearing at the seams of pride and pain. Months before my promotion, they had busted a cell that trafficked in information. Lists of deployments, schedules, and families. That's where the ring got its teeth. The ring had taken to warning families, making threats, and offering bribes to those who would play along and sow discord. The SEALs had intercepted a plan meant to make me look unstable, a plan to place agents at the ceremony to start a scene, to create scandal, and to make my unit doubt my judgment. They had, in secret, warned my family that the scene would be dangerous. The family had been given a choice: be exposed in public and possibly get a target painted on their backs, or step away and be safe. When my mother spoke, she did not plead. She explained with the hard clarity of someone who'd chosen between two imperfect paths. We thought if we made ourselves absent, they would have no leverage, she said. We thought if we were quiet and out of the way, you could stand and be who you needed to be without them being able to touch us. It was not an apology, but rather an explanation. I remember that line because it cut me. They had been protecting me by hiding. It was heroic, and it was cruel in a way that still made my chest ache. I had wanted a witness at my moment of honor, a human mirror to reflect back the years of sacrifice. Instead, they had traded themselves for that mirror. Then the SEALs did the thing that shuffled everything into a new order. They gave me the evidence. They were carrying photos, thick manila envelopes, a redacted ledger, a list of phone numbers, and a sealed court order that they had gotten through the kind of jurisdictional bruising that makes men competent in the dark. The papers told a story in ink that my family could not have told without breaking more secrecy than they were willing to risk. The ring had been feeding on the edges of service members' lives, coercing and intimidating. My family had been one of many targets. But the ledger also showed something else. Names of people who had been paid to disrupt ceremonies, to humiliate, and to make a scene. One of those names belonged to a familiar face, a man who had sat near us at a community fundraiser months ago, smiling and kind. I had always thought of him as someone respectable. The record said otherwise. Why did you wait until now? I asked the SEAL who had been my accidental savior years ago. He stated, because this is the moment when justice could follow. We had to build a case. Handing you pieces without the whole could have made things worse. And because some battles are slower, not everything is an explosion. Some battles are patient. His words held the patient cruelty of a long ledger, and there was truth in them. There is a kind of justice that is a slow gear, shifting only when the teeth align. The SEALs had been building that gear. We did not hold a trial in my living room that night. We talked as long as the water masked our voices as we sat under the Pier's lighting. I learned things I had not known about their fear, their courage, and the many small choices that parenthood demands. I learned that loving someone in danger often produces strange and solitary acts. I learned that their absence at my ceremony had been a choice born from terror and love in equal measure. But for a story to feel like justice, it needs more than just a revelation. Action had to follow the truth. The SEALs did not just hand me envelopes. They offered to help me unmask the ring publicly, to use the evidence to pull the net. Over the next weeks, there were raids that read like the climax of something gritty and righteous. Vehicles stopped on overpasses, men taken quietly into custody, and servers seized. Men who had hired themselves out to intimidate soldiers found themselves looking at prosecutors' faces that had not been present in the dark where they'd operated. The ring's leaders were brought into daylight and photographed, their calls recorded, and their payments logged. There were quiet moments during this that have stayed with me. One was the look on my father's face when he watched the cameras approach the home of a man who had been paying to mess with families. Another was my sister showing me the handful of photos she had of the men who had visited their house. The photos from a phone she'd had the courage to keep. Because they were pieces of the evidence we turned over. The photos were minor victories. The prosecution moved in a way that felt both fast and unbearably slow. The system sometimes broke down like a machine overloaded with paperwork due to depositions and court orders. There were nights when nothing happened except for the hum of lights and the smell of coffee and the knowledge that people were working to put right things that should never have been misused. The retaliation had its own weight as well. A man's life had been upended publicly. Some who were complicit in the ring were old friends or acquaintances, and their exposure caused fractures and reckonings that reached into places I had not imagined. My promotion did not erase the cost. Promotions and courtrooms could not replace the time I spent with my children or the birthdays I missed, but they created a ledger of accountability that mattered. On the day the ring's leaders were arraigned, our family sat together at last in a packed courtroom. I felt both dread and relief at the same time. People looked at us, some curious, some accusing, and some bored. The SEALs sat in the back row, unremarked, their presence a steadying anchor. My family was there not as absence, but as witness, and that made the strange architecture of my ceremony feel whole again. The testimony was technical and yet intimate, and when the perpetrator spoke his defense, that he had been conducting business, that he had not meant to cause anyone pain, the absurdity of it lodged in my throat. People who exploit vulnerability often couch their wrongdoing in the language of commerce. But legal language is an inadequate bed for the violence of fear. When the judge delivered the sentence, it felt like a punctuation mark after a long sentence. The men who had preyed on families were ordered to pay, to forfeit assets, and to be monitored. Those things reduced the space in which such crimes could hide, but they could never replace the years we had lost. After the trials and arrests, I anticipated that everything would return to a simpler plane. It did not. There were adjustments. My family and I learned to approach each other with more explanation and more patience. I listened to my mother tell me about the nights she had sat awake deciding whether to call our unit or just vanish. I learned that the bravest acts were often the ones that nobody saw, staying hidden in a safe house while the enemy searched for you, refusing to be bait. There is a moment I return to again and again, standing in my father's small yard, my rank medal tucked under my hand like a secret I had expected to be celebrated and instead had to lay down and discuss like a wound. "We were protecting the man we knew you had to be," he said as he took my hand. "We were scared. We were cowardly and brave in the same breath. We forgave each other awkwardly, like men repairing something with hands that still bore scars. There was no immaculate reconciliation, no sudden emotional repair. There were broken pieces and attempts to glue them together. That, I have learned, is how families survive, not by being flawless, but by continuing to try." The SEALs left not long after the verdicts. They did not stay for the family reconciliation dinner. They had their own reasons, their own quiet missions. The leader, the man whose life I had once steadied, clasped my shoulder and handed me the coin he carried. "When you feel unmoored," he said, "remember that you were part of something larger. Not every rescue has to be your rescue." What he meant was plain and profound. A life of service is a chain of small debts and blessings, not an individual ledger. The coin was a symbol of that debt repaid and a reminder that honor is not only won in public. Sometimes it is upheld in secrecy, in the soft, invisible acts of those around you. In the months after the courtroom, I took the time to do the hard work of living. I spoke to a counselor about the shame that had followed me like cold weather. I went to family therapy with my sister and my parents, and we rebuilt our language. At a town hall, I talked about the ring, how vulnerabilities are exploited, and the need to be vigilant in a post-war world where violence sometimes comes in the form of a phone call. People listened, some with surprise, some with the polite interest of those who have lives. A few wrote me letters thanking me for speaking out. A few accused me of grandstanding. That's the world, too. There is one moment from those months that I still carry like faith. My son, then a teenager who had been wary of my uniform and absent fatherhood, sidled up to me in the garage where I was tinkering with an old radio. He complimented my efforts by placing his hand on the coin I held in my palm. It was not praise of ceremony. It was an echo of understanding. That was the reward I had wanted all along. The arc of that year taught me a lesson that would have sounded trite in calmer times. That honor is complicated, that love takes strange forms, and that justice is often slow. But it also taught me a less tidy lesson, that the people who stand beside you when you are at your worst are your family, even when they make choices you cannot immediately forgive. The SEAL surprise did more than vindicate me in the eyes of the law. It inserted a different kind of meaning into my life. They gave me the gift of truth disclosure, an action that brought an abstract fear to life and made it possible to overcome it. If there is a moral to tell, it is a blunt one. Courage isn't always the outward-facing thing you celebrate at parades. Sometimes it is the secret decision to hide from danger so that someone you love can stand in the light. Justice, likewise, is not always loud. It can be a man in plain clothes handing you a coin and a file and saying, "We've been watching." I still carry the coin. It weighs nothing on the wrist, but it anchors me more effectively than any medal. I hold it in my hand and remember a night by a pier, the quietly furious work of men and women who value human life outside of public credit, and the painful, beautiful complexity of family when the world feels unfairly loud, when headlines shout and websites wag. Years later, in quiet moments, I think about the men we brought down. I think about the lives they had touched, not only as victims, but also as perpetrators who had once been sons and brothers themselves. I do not simply celebrate their capture. I mourn the fact that someone thought to exploit the tenderness of home for profit. I also applaud the sluggish, bureaucratic machinery that, if pushed hard enough, can still carry out some form of justice. The SEAL surprise restored more than my reputation. It restored a sense of reality that I needed. The reality that there are people out there who will go to lengths you cannot imagine to keep others safe, and that sometimes the world's best acts are unseen. They taught me that being a man in uniform is not a solo endeavor. Rather, it is a life that is intertwined with other people and sometimes necessitates accepting protection and forgiving those who run away in fear. When I look at my promotion pin now, it no longer feels like a single moment. It is a collection of deployments, unsuccessful attempts to be present at home, a mother who gave up an applause to ensure the safety of her children, and SEALs who moved in the dark so that others could breathe in the light. It is messy, stubborn, and real. I tell this story as a tribute to those who choose to do the unglamorous work. To the SEALs who surprised me, thank you for choosing the slow, necessary labor of justice. To my family, thank you for a bravery that tasted like exile. To anyone who has been abandoned in public and rescued in secret, your story still counts. My family was returned to me, and predators were removed from the streets, using the only tools that would hold them accountable, not as a clean headline. Instead, justice was served as a lengthy, patient operation. In the end, the lesson I learned was somewhere in the middle of the practical and the holy. Honor is not what other people see at ceremonies. It is what you choose every day, even when no one is clapping. If this reads like vindication, that is because it is. But it is also a cautionary tale about how fragile the lives of those who serve can be when predatory men decide to make a profit out of fear. It is a celebration of the private decisions families make, frequently unspoken, to safeguard the people they love, as well as the women and men who act without audience or applause. There is no tidy ending. There is only the slow mending, the continued presence at school plays and graduations, and the returns home that are sometimes late and sometimes early. There is the coin in my pocket, the scars on my hands, and the soft, complicated sound of my father's laugh when he thinks no one is listening. There is the knowledge that when it mattered most, men who owed me nothing came and paid a debt I did not even know I had. That knowledge is a kind of justice all its own, and for that I am every day quietly grateful. They pinned the rank on my chest, but my family walked out. I spent weeks searching for answers in anguish, confusion, and rage, only to discover something far more sinister than a family dispute. We had been targeted. When a silent team of former Navy SEALs rolled up to an empty pier with files, photos, and a promise of justice, everything changed. What looks like betrayal turns out to be a secret, desperate attempt to keep us safe. and the SEAL's investigation exposes a shadowy ring preying on military families. Honor is put to the test, loyalty is hidden, and justice is earned the hard way in this tale. Watch as I reveal what they hid, who they arrested, and how a surprise visit from elite operatives turned a moment of public shame into a quiet victory for truth. If you want the full story, the evidence, the courtroom showdown, and the emotional fallout, hit play, subscribe, and join the conversation below. Have you ever been lied to in order to defend someone? In the comments, tell us your opinion. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to hit the subscription button.